The afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the school cafeteria, bouncing off shiny marble floors and polished silver trays. Laughter filled the air, mixed with the clatter of plates and the chatter of students dressed in designer clothes. Everything in that room screamed wealth, the kind that made people forget what hunger even felt like. At the far end of the room sat a boy who didn't quite fit into the noise. He was quiet, not shy, just the kind of person who didn't feel the need to be loud. Everyone knew who he was, and the son of one of the richest men in the country. Some admired him, some envied him, but most stayed away. He didn't talk much, and in a place where people judged worth by popularity, that made him invisible in his own strange way. He was halfway through his lunch when he noticed something that pulled his attention away from the table. Near the door stood a girl, holding her lunch tray tightly against her chest. She looked uncertain, like someone who had walked into a room full of strangers and wasn't sure where to go. Her uniform was the same as everyone else's, but something about her stood out. Her shoes were older, her backpack a little faded, and her hair tied back neatly with a ribbon that had seen better days. She looked nervous, scanning the tables for a place to sit. It was her first week at this school, a school filled with children who had never known struggle. She was here on a full scholarship, part of a new program that allowed underprivileged students to study alongside the elite. But instead of feeling included, she felt like a visitor in a world she didn't belong to. She tried to smile at a group of girls sitting near the middle, but they looked away, whispering something that made them laugh quietly. She swallowed hard, pretending not to notice. She turned toward another table where a few boys sat talking about cars and weekend trips abroad. One of them glanced at her, frowned slightly, and went back to his meal. Her tray began to shake slightly in her hands. She looked around again. Every table seemed full, not because there wasn't space, but because no one wanted her there. The boy at the corner table kept watching. Something inside him tightened. He didn't know her, but he could feel the discomfort written all over her face. For a moment he thought of looking away, pretending he hadn't seen anything. It would be easier. But then she started walking, slowly, carefully, toward his table. Every step she took seemed heavy, like she was walking through water. The noise in the cafeteria seemed to fade until there was only the sound of her shoes tapping lightly against the floor. She stopped in front of him. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Can I eat with you?" she asked. The words were simple, but the way she said them made them feel like a plea. The room went quiet for a moment. A few students looked over, curious. Some whispered. Others smirked. The boy didn't speak at first. He wasn't used to people asking him things like that. Most of the time people came to him for favors, not for kindness. He looked up at her. Her eyes were unsure, her lips pressed together nervously. And in that second, something broke inside him. Not in a painful way, but in the kind of way that makes you realize how cold your world has become. He nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, sure, sit." The relief on her face was quiet but real. She smiled, and a small, genuine smile, and placed her tray on the table. She sat down carefully, like she was afraid she might be asked to leave again. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The boy focused on his plate, pretending not to notice the whispers around them. He could feel the eyes on his back, people wondering why he was letting her sit with him. She picked up her fork and began eating slowly. He noticed she didn't take big bites, maybe because she didn't want to seem hungry. She ate politely, her movements careful, respectful, almost too proper for a child her age. After a few moments, he asked quietly, "You're new, right?" She nodded. "Yeah, my mom said it's a big opportunity." He could tell from her tone that the words "big opportunity" meant more to her than anyone else in this room. He said, "You'll get used to it here." She smiled again. "I hope so." For the rest of lunch, they didn't talk much. But something small, something invisible passed between them, a kind of unspoken understanding. The next day, when he entered the cafeteria, she was already there, sitting at the same spot. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. He felt something strange in his chest, not embarrassment, not pity, just a quiet warmth. He sat down beside her again. They talked a little more this time. She told him she lived far from the school, that her mother worked 2 jobs to keep their small apartment running. She said her favorite subject was science because she liked learning how things worked. He listened more than he spoke. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice. He just listened. Over the next few days, their quiet lunches became a routine. Some students stared, others whispered, but neither of them cared anymore. She had found a seat, and he had found a friend who didn't care about his name or his money. But not everything was easy. One afternoon, while they were sitting together, a group of boys passed by. One of them, trying to impress his friend, said loudly, "Didn't know we were running a charity here?" The girl froze. Her hand stopped halfway to her mouth. The boy looked up sharply, his jaw tightening. The group laughed and walked away. She didn't say anything. She just looked down and continued eating. He wanted to say something to defend her, but she smiled and said softly, "It's okay. I'm used to it." Those words hit him harder than anything else could have. Used to it. He didn't know what to say. For someone who had everything, who never had to worry about belonging, he couldn't imagine what it felt like to be used to being treated like that. After lunch, when they parted ways, he walked through the long hallways of the school, his thoughts heavy. For the first time, he noticed how many things around him were taken for granted. The air conditioning, the polished floors, the smell of food always ready at the right time. He thought of her small hands holding that tray, of her trying to smile when people turned her away. And something inside him shifted. That night, while sitting at the dinner table in his large house, surrounded by food that could feed 10 families, he barely touched his plate. His parents talked about business and meetings and new properties, but he wasn't really listening. He kept thinking about that moment, the way she had looked when she asked, "Can I eat with you?" It was such a simple question, yet it carried so much pain behind it. It wasn't about food. It was about being seen, being accepted, being allowed to belong. He realized that no amount of money could buy that kind of courage, the courage it took for her to ask that question in a room full of people who thought she didn't belong there. When he went to bed that night, he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the day in his mind, her quiet smile, her calm voice, the way she never complained. Something told him that she had been through more than she ever said out loud, and he decided, right there, that he wouldn't let her feel alone again. The next morning, he was the first one to reach the cafeteria. He waited at their usual spot, and when she walked in holding her tray, she looked surprised to see him already there. He smiled and she smiled back, and that same small, real smile that somehow made the noisy cafeteria feel warm. She sat down, and they began eating together again. And though neither of them realized it yet, that one small moment, that single question, had already started to change both of their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. Sometimes, it doesn't take a big act to touch someone's heart. Sometimes all it takes is a seat at the table, and a simple, honest question from someone brave enough to ask. Days turned into weeks, and the cafeteria didn't feel so big anymore. Every lunch break, the same thing happened. She would walk in quietly holding her tray close, and he would already be sitting there, waiting. No words were needed. She'd smile, he'd nod, and they'd share that small table that had once felt empty but now carried something warm, something like friendship. At first, their talks were short. He wasn't used to conversations that didn't revolve around business or luxury, but she had a way of talking that made even the smallest things sound interesting. She would talk about the stray cat that followed her home, or how the rain made her street flood so badly that she had to roll up her pants just to reach the bus stop. He listened quietly, his fork often stopping mid-air. Her stories didn't sound sad. She told them with humor and light, as if they were just ordinary parts of life. And maybe for her they were, but to him they were a window into a world he'd never seen before. One day she told him about her mother. "She works at a laundry," she said, opening her milk carton carefully. "She leaves before I wake up and comes back when I'm already asleep. But every morning I find breakfast ready." He didn't know what to say. He had never seen his father cook or even make coffee. The staff did everything at home. The idea that someone could work that hard just to make sure her daughter had a meal hit him in a way he didn't expect. He asked softly, "Don't you get lonely?" She shrugged, smiling a little. "Sometimes. But I know she's doing it for me. That's enough." He looked down at his food, suddenly realizing how often he left meals untouched because he wasn't hungry. He wondered what his life would look like if he had been born where she lived, if the things he took for granted were things she had to fight for every day. Later that week, he saw her sitting alone outside the library after school. She was reading an old science book, one with torn edges and pencil marks inside. He walked over and asked what she was doing. Studying, she said, not looking up. I like learning about space. The stars, the planets. It makes me feel small, but in a good way. He sat beside her. Why in a good way? She smiled softly. Because it means my problems aren't as big as I think they are. He didn't answer, but her words stayed in his mind long after he got home. That night, his father called him into his office. A large room filled with awards and framed photos of business meetings. His father was on a call talking about a deal worth millions. When he hung up, he looked at his son and said, "You'll be joining me at the company soon. It's time you start learning." The boy nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He wasn't thinking about business or money. He was thinking about a girl who studied under streetlights and still smiled about it. The next day at school, the cafeteria was louder than usual. It was pizza day, everyone's favorite. But when she sat down beside him, he noticed she didn't have pizza on her tray. Just rice and vegetables. He asked, "You don't like pizza?" She smiled a little and said, "I do." But it cost extra. He froze. It had never crossed his mind that something as small as an extra slice of pizza could be a luxury for someone. Without saying anything, he slid a slice from his own plate onto hers. She looked surprised. "You don't have to." "I know," he interrupted gently. "But I want to." She hesitated, then smiled and took it. "Thank you." That small act felt like nothing to him, but the way her eyes brightened made him realize how much it meant. As days went by, they became closer. She told him about the things she loved, like music, the smell of new books, and how she dreamed of becoming a teacher someday. "I want to teach kids who don't get chances like me," she said, "so they don't feel small just because they don't have money." He admired that about her, her ability to dream big even when life gave her so little. Sometimes, they would sit outside after lunch watching the playground. She would laugh at something small, like a kid running too fast or a bird stealing a sandwich, and he would catch himself smiling too. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like the rich kid around her. He just felt like himself, but not everyone liked seeing them together. One afternoon, as they were leaving class, a group of boys stopped him in the hallway. "Hey," one of them said, smirking. "You're really hanging out with her?" He looked at them calmly. "Yeah, I am," the boy laughed. "You could be with anyone here and you pick her?" He didn't reply. He just walked away, but he noticed she had heard them. Her smile was gone when he caught up to her outside. "You heard that, didn't you?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "It's fine." "No, it's not," he said, frowning. She gave a small shrug. "People talk. I'm used to it." He wanted to argue, to tell her she shouldn't have to be used to it, but she just smiled again, that same brave smile she always had. A few days later, she didn't come to school. Then another day passed. Then another. He felt uneasy. The cafeteria felt strange without her sitting across from him. He didn't even finish his lunch. On the third day, he asked a teacher if she was okay. The teacher said she was sick and her mother couldn't afford to take her to a private clinic. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her cough the week before, about how she had laughed it off, saying it was just a little cold. He told his driver to take him to the address listed in the school's record. The driver hesitated. It wasn't a part of town they usually went to, but the boy insisted. When they arrived, the streets were narrow and uneven. Small houses lined both sides, children running barefoot through puddles. It was noisy but alive. He found her house in a small place with a metal roof and peeling paint. He knocked gently. Her mother opened the door. She looked tired but kind. When he explained who he was, she smiled faintly and called her daughter. When she appeared wrapped in a blanket, she looked surprised. "What are you doing here?" He held up a paper bag. "I brought some medicine." "And soup." Her eyes softened. "You didn't have to do that," he smiled. "I know." "But I wanted to." She let out a small laugh, then coughed. "You really shouldn't have come all the way here." "Then you shouldn't have gotten sick," he teased gently. She smiled again, that same brave, warm smile that always seemed to light up her face, even when things were hard. He stayed for a while, sitting on the small step outside their house. He watched the neighborhood kids playing, their laughter echoing between the walls. It wasn't a rich place, but there was life, laughter, and something that money couldn't buy. connection. When he left, he waved goodbye and she waved back, holding her blanket close. That night, as his car drove past rows of streetlights, he looked out the window thinking about everything he had seen. The broken roads, the old houses, the laughter in the air. It all felt more real than anything in his world of marble floors and chandeliers. He realized that her world might look small from the outside, but it was full of things his world lacked: warmth, effort, and meaning. And that's when it hit him. He wasn't helping her. She was helping him see, helping him feel. From that day on, something inside him changed quietly. He started noticing things he had ignored before: the cafeteria workers, the janitors, the drivers waiting outside school. He smiled at them, greeted them, even thanked them. It felt small, but it felt right. All because of one girl who once stood in a crowded cafeteria, clutching her lunch tray, asking softly, "Can I eat with you?" He didn't know it yet, but her courage that day had already begun shaping the person he was becoming. And as the days went on, he started to realize that real kindness doesn't come from wealth. It comes from understanding. The days leading up to his birthday felt like a blur of noise and lights. His father had planned a grand party, the kind that made the local news every year. Expensive decorations, famous guests, and food that could feed a small town. Everyone in school was talking about it. For most kids, it was a dream, an invitation to the biggest event of the season. But for him, it didn't feel like much of a celebration. He kept thinking about how different her world was from his. How she lived in a small house with a metal roof while he lived in a mansion with more rooms than he could count. How she found joy in the smallest things while he often felt empty surrounded by everything. At school, everyone was buzzing about the upcoming party. Some students were showing off their invitations like trophies. When he walked into the cafeteria, she smiled at him as always and asked, "So, big day coming up, huh?" He nodded. "Yeah, my dad's going all out again." She laughed lightly. "I can imagine. Must be nice." He looked at her for a moment and said quietly, "It's okay, I guess." She tilted her head. "Just okay?" He shrugged. "Too many people. Too much noise. I'd rather have a quiet dinner." She smiled. "Then maybe it's not about how big the party is. Maybe it's about who's sitting at your table." Her words sank deep into him. He wanted to invite her, but something inside held him back. Not because he didn't want her there, but because he knew others wouldn't understand. Still, he promised himself he'd find a way. The next day, he brought it up to his father. "Can we invite someone from school who's not on the list?" His father looked surprised. "Who?" "A friend," he said simply. His father smiled faintly. "Of course. Anyone you want." He didn't mention her name yet. Something told him to wait until the right time. The day of the party arrived. The mansion was glowing with lights. Cars lined up outside, music played from the speakers, and laughter filled every corner. Tables were covered in food, cakes, desserts, and dishes from around the world. He stood near the entrance, waiting. He kept glancing toward the gate, hoping she would walk in. He had sent an invitation through a classmate that morning. She had smiled when she received it, but didn't say if she'd come. Hour after hour passed. People came and went, but she never showed up. He tried to enjoy himself, but his heart wasn't in it. Even when his father gave a small speech about family and blessings, his mind wandered. He pictured her small home, the narrow streets, the way she always smiled despite everything. Late in the evening, as the crowd danced and laughed, he stepped outside. The air was cooler there, quieter. He looked up at the stars, thinking about her words. Maybe it's about who's sitting at your table. And for the first time, surrounded by hundreds of people, he felt completely alone. The next morning, at school, she wasn't there. The chair beside him stayed empty. He waited for her all day, hoping she'd come. When he asked a teacher, they said she hadn't attended. Something didn't feel right. That afternoon, he told his driver to take him to her neighborhood again. The driver hesitated, glancing at the polished car and the narrow, bumpy road ahead, but he nodded and went anyway. When they reached her street, the difference hit him like a wave. The houses were small and close together, kids running barefoot, people sitting outside chatting. It was noisy but alive, not polished like his world, but real. He spotted her sitting on a low step outside her house, wearing a simple blue dress. She was eating a sandwich, smiling as she watched a group of kids play tag in the street. When she saw him, her eyes widened. "You came?" he smiled. "You didn't come to the party." She laughed softly. "I didn't think I'd fit in there." He frowned. "Why not?" She looked down at her hands. "Because your world isn't mine." He sat beside her on the step. "That doesn't mean you don't belong." She shrugged, still smiling faintly. "Maybe, but it's okay. I had my own party, see?" She held up her sandwich with a playful grin. He couldn't help but laugh. "That doesn't look much like a party." "It is when you make it one," she said simply. He reached into the small box he was carrying. Inside was a slice of the giant cake from his party, wrapped carefully. "Then here, your share of the party." She laughed again, eyes lighting up. "You really brought this for me?" He nodded. "Yeah, and there's more where that came from." She shook her head. "This is enough." Then, without hesitation, she broke the slice in half and called out to the kids playing nearby. "Hey, come here." The kids ran over, eyes wide. She handed them pieces of the cake. "Share," she said with a grin. They all sat around her eating, laughing, their faces messy with frosting. The sound of their laughter echoed through the narrow street. He watched quietly, feeling something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was admiration. She had nothing, yet she shared everything. When they finished, she leaned back, looking up at the sky. "You know what's funny?" she said. "You have all the things people dream of, and I have nothing. But somehow I think we're both missing the same thing." He turned to her. "What's that?" "Real happiness," she said softly. "Not the kind that comes from parties or presents. The kind that stays even when everything else is gone." Her words stayed with him long after he left that day. When he got home, the mansion felt even bigger and emptier. He walked past the leftover food, the decorations, the music equipment, all of it suddenly meaningless. His father noticed his quietness during dinner. "Something wrong?" he asked. The boy looked up. "Do you ever wonder why we have so much when others have so little?" His father paused, caught off guard. "That's how life is, son. Some people are lucky, some aren't. But what if we could change that?" he asked softly. His father sighed, unsure what to say. That night, as the boy lay in bed, he replayed the image of her sharing that small slice of cake with the neighborhood kids. Her laughter, their joy, the way she made happiness out of nothing. He realized something. It wasn't wealth that made life rich. It was kindness. It was people. Over the next few days, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He started noticing the people around him. The school janitor cleaning quietly after hours. The cafeteria workers who served food no one thanked them for. The security guard who stood outside in the heat. He began greeting them, talking to them, thanking them. Small things, but real ones. When she returned to school the following week, he was waiting at their table with 2 lunches. She looked surprised. "Why 2?" he smiled. "Because today I'm eating what you eat," she laughed. "You won't like it." "Maybe," he said, opening the box. "But I want to try." They ate together, and though the food was simple, it felt different, fuller somehow. That afternoon, as they walked out of school, she said quietly, "You've changed." He looked at her. "How so?" "You look happier," he smiled. "Maybe because I finally understand what matters." She nodded. "It's not about what we have. It's about what we share." Her words stayed in his heart long after that day. The next time his father mentioned business, profits, and numbers, he listened quietly, but his mind was elsewhere. He wasn't dreaming of companies or wealth anymore. He was thinking about that small street, those laughing kids, and a girl who taught him what it truly meant to give. It wasn't about charity. It was about humanity, and though he didn't know it yet, that single afternoon sitting on a broken step, sharing a piece of leftover cake, would mark the beginning of a new purpose in his life, one that would change not just his heart, but the lives of countless others one day. The world looked different now. It wasn't the buildings or the cars or the expensive things around him that changed. It was his eyes. Ever since that day on the small street, watching her share her cake with kids who had nothing, he couldn't look at his old life the same way. The noise of luxury that once surrounded him now felt empty. The laughter at high-end parties seemed forced. The taste of expensive food no longer excited him. Something had shifted deep inside, quietly but permanently. At school, he noticed things that used to blur into the background, like how the cafeteria staff smiled even after hours of standing, or how the gardener hummed songs while trimming flowers outside the library. These were people no one really saw. Yet they were the ones who made everything work. He began helping them in small ways. Some afternoons he stayed behind to stack chairs after lunch or helped the janitor collect trash. At first everyone looked at him strangely. Some students laughed, others whispered. But he didn't care. When she noticed, she smiled knowingly. "You don't have to do that," she said one day as he helped carry a stack of trays. He looked at her and said, "I know. But someone should." She just smiled, and that was enough. They started spending more time together, not just at lunch, but before and after classes. She showed him her favorite spots around the school, the quiet corner near the library where the sunlight hit just right in the afternoons, the old tree near the back field where she sometimes sat and read when she needed peace. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. They'd just sit quietly, listening to the wind or the sound of distant laughter. One day she brought him a small notebook. The cover was worn, but inside were neatly written pages. "It's my dream book," she said. He opened it and read the first line. "I want to become a teacher and build a school for kids who can't afford one." He looked at her. "You really think you can do that?" She smiled softly. "I don't know, but I want to try." Her voice carried no arrogance, just quiet determination. It amazed him, the way she believed in her dreams without needing anyone's approval. That night, he took out a blank notebook of his own and began writing for the first time in years. Not about business or wealth, but about what really mattered. He wrote about her courage, her laughter, her kindness, about the things she had taught him without even trying. As time went by, the change in him became obvious. He started questioning things at home. Why his father's company spent millions on marketing but so little on charity. Why his family owned more than they could ever use. One evening during dinner, he finally spoke up. "Dad," he said slowly, "what if we use some of our money to help kids who can't go to school?" His father looked up from his meal, surprised. "Help kids?" "Yes," he said. "Not as a donation, as something real. Like building schools or giving scholarships." His father smiled faintly. "You're a good kid, but the world doesn't change with feelings. It changes with business." He wanted to argue, but he stayed quiet. Later that night, he found his mother sitting by the window reading. He sat beside her and said softly, "Do you think helping others really matters?" She looked at him for a long time before replying. "If you help for the right reasons, it always does." Her answer gave him hope. The next week, he started small. He began collecting leftover food from the cafeteria and giving it to the workers before leaving school. He used his allowance to buy notebooks and pencils for children in the nearby neighborhoods. He didn't tell anyone, and not even her, but one afternoon she found out. She saw him handing out supplies near the school gate. When their eyes met, he smiled awkwardly, as if caught doing something secret. She walked up to him and said, "You're changing people's days." He shrugged. "It's not much. It doesn't have to be much," she said softly. "It just has to be kind." After that, they started doing it together. Every Friday after school, they packed bags of food or books and gave them out to children nearby. It became their little routine, their way of sharing happiness the same way she had shared that piece of cake. The more time he spent with her, the more he understood life in a way he never had before. He once thought money was everything. Now he saw that the smallest acts, a smile, a shared meal, a kind word, and could mean more than all the luxury in the world. But life has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. One morning, when he reached school, she wasn't there again. He waited, but her chair stayed empty. The teacher said she had to help her mother, who had fallen ill. He felt a familiar ache. That night, he visited again, carrying a small bag of groceries and some medicine. When he reached her house, the lights were dim. She opened the door and smiled weakly. "You came again?" He nodded. "I wanted to make sure you're okay." She stepped aside to let him in. Her mother was lying on a small bed, breathing heavily but smiling kindly at him. "You must be the boy she talks about," her mother said in a tired voice. He felt his cheeks warm. "I just wanted to help." The woman nodded slowly. "You have a good heart. Don't lose it." Those words stayed with him long after he left. When he got home that night, he sat by his window and looked out at the city lights. Each light represented a home, a family, a story, some shining brightly, others barely flickering. He realized that behind every number, every statistic, there were real people, people with dreams and struggles just like hers. From that day, he made a decision. He didn't want to grow up to be just another rich man. He wanted to be someone who made a difference. He started learning about social work, about education systems, about how foundations and charities operated. He read late into the night, pages spread across his desk. At school, he shared his ideas with her. "One day I'll build a foundation," he said. "We'll make sure kids like you never have to ask, 'Can I eat with you?'" Again, she laughed softly. "You say we as if I'll be part of it." He looked at her seriously. "You will be. I want you to teach in one of the schools we'll build." Her smile that day was the brightest he had ever seen. "Then I guess we both have a lot of work to do." The next few years passed quietly. They graduated together, still sitting at the same cafeteria table every day. Some students had long forgotten about the girl who once stood alone with her tray. Now everyone respected her, not because of her clothes or background, but because of her spirit. On their last day of school, she handed him the small notebook again, the one with her dreams written inside. "Keep it," she said, "to remind you why you started." He took it, promising he would. Years later, when he walked into his father's office, older and wiser, he placed that same notebook on the table. "Dad," he said calmly, "I don't want to run the business the way it's always been run. I want to change it." His father frowned. "Change it how?" "By giving back," he said. "By helping kids who can't afford to study. By using our success for something good." There was silence for a long time. Then his father sighed and said, "If that's what you believe in, then do it right." And that was the moment everything began to change. He used part of the company's profits to start a foundation that funded education for underprivileged children. He worked tirelessly, visiting schools, meeting families, setting up programs. He didn't just sign checks. He showed up. He listened. He cared. And every time he saw a child smiling while holding a new book or eating a warm meal, he remembered her. The girl who once stood in a crowded cafeteria and asked a question that had changed his life forever. He often whispered her words in his heart. "It's not about what we have. It's about what we share." Those words became the motto of his foundation. What started as a friendship between two children from different worlds had turned into a lifelong mission. And deep down he knew he owed it all to her. The morning air was calm and the sun painted the city in gold. The man stood by the wide glass window of his office, watching the people below. The city had grown fast. Tall buildings, new schools, and endless traffic. But what he saw wasn't the noise or the rush. He saw the stories behind every step, the children holding their parents' hands, the workers smiling even after long hours. Years had passed since the day he had last seen her. Time had moved quickly, and though his life had changed in many ways, one thing had remained constant. The memory of the girl who had once asked, "Can I eat with you?" He had built the foundation they had dreamed of. It had started small, one classroom in a poor neighborhood, but now there were schools in several towns. Each one carried the same message painted on the gate: kindness builds the future. He visited those schools often, sitting with the children, listening to their stories. He never told them who he was. To them, he was just a man who cared to listen. That made him happier than any title or wealth could. One afternoon, as he sat reviewing some project files, his assistant walked in with a letter. "Sir, this came from one of the schools your foundation supports in the countryside," she said. He took it, opened the envelope, and began to read. The letter was from a small village school. The principal thanked him for funding their new building and invited him to the opening ceremony. At the end of the letter was a name, the teacher in charge of the program. He froze for a second. The name looked familiar. His heart began to race as he read it again. It was her name. He leaned back in his chair, stunned. After all these years, could it really be her? He read the letter twice more, his chest tightening with every line. She was a teacher now, and not just any teacher. She was leading one of the foundation's most successful schools. He smiled to himself. She had done it. She had made her dream come true. He decided he would go. not as the founder but as a quiet visitor. He wanted to see her without the formality, without the cameras, without the noise, just her, as she was. The next morning he drove out early. The road stretched long and quiet, surrounded by green fields and small houses. It felt like another world, far away from the life of meetings and polished floors. When he arrived, children were playing outside the school. Their laughter filled the air. The building was simple but bright, painted in cheerful colors. A large sign on the wall read, "Dream big, stay kind." He stepped inside quietly. The hallways were filled with drawings, handmade posters, and quotes written in chalk. Everything about the place felt alive, full of love. Then from one of the classrooms he heard a voice. A soft, calm voice reading aloud to a group of children. He walked toward it slowly, and there she was, standing at the front of the class reading from a book, her smile exactly as he remembered. The same warmth, the same kindness. Time hadn't changed that. She looked different, older, more mature, but her eyes still carried that same gentle light. The children listened to her with complete attention, their small faces lit with admiration. He stood by the doorway, watching quietly. After the class ended, she turned and saw him. For a moment she just stared, disbelief flashing in her eyes. Then her face broke into a smile. "I knew it was you," she said softly, walking closer. He laughed quietly. "You recognized me?" "How could I not?" she said. "You're still the same, just wearing fancier shoes." They both laughed. The sound felt like coming home after a long journey. She led him outside to sit under the big tree in the schoolyard. It was almost like the one they used to sit under back in school. "I can't believe you're really here," she said, "after all this time." He looked around the schoolyard, the children running, the sound of learning in the background. "You did it," he said softly. "You built the dream," she smiled. "No, we did it. You gave me hope when I had none. You listened when no one else did." He shook his head. "You're the one who taught me what kindness really means." They sat in silence for a while, watching the children play. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting moving shadows across the ground. Finally, she said, "I always hoped we'd meet again, not because of the past, but to show you that your kindness mattered." He felt his throat tighten. "You don't know how much it means to see this. Every time I built a new school, I thought of you. Every time a child smiled, I remembered your words." She looked at him quietly, then said, "Do you ever miss the old days?" He smiled faintly. "Every day. But maybe those days were meant to change us. Maybe that one lunch table was the start of everything." She nodded slowly. "I still remember how nervous I was that day. I almost didn't ask to sit with you. And if you hadn't," he said, "my life would have been completely different." They both laughed softly again. There was something peaceful in that laughter. Like all the years that had passed didn't matter anymore. Later, as the sun began to set, the school held a small ceremony. The children sang, parents clapped, and the community gathered to thank the foundation for helping build the school. When it was his turn to speak, he walked to the small stage. He looked at the crowd and at the faces full of hope, and then at her, standing near the children, smiling proudly. He said, "Years ago, I met someone who taught me that kindness can change everything. I didn't understand it then, but today, standing here, I do. This school isn't just a building. It's a reminder that small acts of care can grow into something bigger than we imagine." The crowd clapped, but he didn't feel like he was giving a speech. He felt like he was closing a circle that had started years ago with a single question. "Can I eat with you?" After the ceremony, as the sky turned orange and purple, he and she walked along the quiet path outside the school. "I always thought you'd become a great businessman," she said with a playful smile. He smiled back. "Maybe, but I'd rather be someone who makes others smile." She laughed. "Then you've done exactly that." He stopped for a moment, looking at her. "You know, I still carry your old notebook. The one with your dreams." Her eyes widened. "You kept it?" He nodded. "So it reminded me to keep going, wait to build something that mattered." She looked down for a moment, her voice soft. "I think you've done that. And maybe now it's time you write your own dreams in it." He smiled. "Maybe we both will. Together." They stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of children's laughter drifting through the air. The world felt right, not perfect, but full of meaning. As he got ready to leave, she handed him a small box. "Open it later," she said. When he returned to the city that night, he sat by his desk and opened the box. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a photo of the two of them back in school, sitting at that cafeteria table, smiling with half-eaten sandwiches between them. On the paper, in her handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for letting me eat with you." It changed everything. He stared at the words for a long time, his heart full. That night he placed the photo on his desk beside the notebook, and for the first time in years he felt complete.